What's going on, fish nerds? Welcome back. I have an update for you on the 55-gallon tank that we aquascaped just a couple of weeks ago. If you remember that scape, we had it looking really good, had the hardscape dialed in, added a bunch of plants to it, had it looking really good, excited for everything to grow in. And then last week I went on vacation. My wife and I left to go out of town to do Thanksgiving with her family. When we left, the tank was looking good. I mean, some of the plants were dying back, you know, going from immersed growth to submersed growth, you know, and so that's to be expected, but otherwise it was doing great. Everything was growing, everything was healthy, you know, everything's looking good, all clean and nice. And we were gone for 1 week. 1 week. And well, I'll just show you. This is what it looked like after 1 week. Holy cow. Seriously, look at all this diatom algae all over the front of this glass. I mean, you can't even see in there. It's just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the plants are still, you know, doing good, but the tank itself just looks horrible, nasty because of all this algae. Just not even technically a week, 6 days is all we were gone. And this is what I came back to. And look at this. Those aren't plants. That's all just a bunch of string algae hanging out in there. Just absolutely filthy. Oh man, it's so gross. There's so much algae in here. So there's nothing in this tank other than the plants. I haven't added any fish, any shrimp, anything. But stick to the end of the video. We will be adding something to this tank today. Partly because of this situation and avoiding this happening again. We've got some guys that are gonna really help with that. But man, there's just diatom algae everywhere. The S. repens is looking really good, what that you can see of it, but it's just covered in this hair algae, and this diatom algae is just everywhere. So I got to get all this cleaned up before we add anything to the tank. I'm going to get all this scrubbed off the glass. I've got an algae scrubber for that. We're going to get all that hair algae out of there. Going to use a toothbrush for that, get everything out of there. Do a big water change for all the stuff that I'm sure I'm going to stir up in the water column. But then after we get everything cleaned up, I actually do have, I've got some organisms, some creatures, some living things that I'm ready to add to this tank. To get this tank started, get it rocking and rolling with some living things in here. And I'm excited for that, and they should greatly help out with this problem. So without further ado, let's get to cleaning this thing, because I can't stand to look at this tank the way it is right now. I need it to be pretty again, so let's get started. Alright, so a half hour into this process, it still looks really bad. And if you hadn't seen the before, this after would still look absolutely horrendous. And it kind of still does, but honestly, all this hair algae and this rutala, I'm afraid to get it out because I don't want to uproot all the plants. Same with this Nasea, and you can see how much of this stuff melted back. But That's new growth, that's new growth, that's new growth. There's a little sprig there, new growth, new growth, new growth. So I'm not worried about it. I mean, it's growing back, but there was a ton of melt back. And all this stuff is new growth on this Rotala. It's looking awesome other than the algae. But we still got all this hair algae down here in the hair grass, and I didn't want to uproot all that. But even though I realize it still looks really bad, it still needs a whole lot of work. At this point, I've got it good enough that I think I'm just ready to just add our new inhabitants and let them take care of the rest, or at least see how much of the rest they will take care of and how long it takes them, because these guys are pretty effective algae eaters. So let's take a look at them. All right, so what I've got here is a box from Flip Aquatics. My buddy Rob had a Cyber Monday sale on Amano shrimp. So I've got 10 of them in here, and they came today. So we're gonna get them out of this box and get them acclimated and get them in this tank. Haha! Looky there. Looks like everybody's there. Everybody's okay. All right, so yeah, everybody is here and accounted for. I counted them all, made sure that everybody was there. Everybody's doing good, no losses looks like. And that's to be expected. I've ordered from Flip Aquatics multiple times now, and every time it's a good experience. I've never had a bad experience working with Rob and the folks at Flip Aquatics. And they were packaged very well, insulated good. And I am just letting them sit here on this table for a little while just to kind of get to room temperature. The bag was a little chilly, even though it was, you know, packaged well. And it's not too cold for these guys. I mean, they're fine, but they did spend a significant portion of the day today in a mail truck until they were delivered to the house. So they did get a little chilly today, which is to be expected, and with shrimp like this is totally fine. They didn't get too cold, but they are colder than this. So I'm just letting them get room temperature for a little while, and then I'll switch them over to another bag, float them for a couple minutes, and then turn them loose. All right, so I was actually able to get the breather bag untied without busting it. Usually those are pretty tricky, and I usually end up just having to cut them open and pour them into something else. You never ever want to just float a breather bag while it's still tied up. One, it won't float, it'll just sink down to the bottom. Two, it cuts off that air exchange and you could suffocate whatever's in the bag. I really like how active they are. That's really promising that they've, you know, been in the mail, you know, been stuffed in a box and got a little bit chilly today, which, you know, that just can't be avoided. You know, shipping in Ohio in almost December, it's, you know, it's just going to happen. But they're very active. Everybody's super healthy, which, as much as cold weather is to be expected in Ohio, healthy shrimp are to be expected by Flip Aquatics. And yes, I paid for these myself. This isn't a sponsored video. I did buy these, but Rob's my buddy. I'm really happy with Flip Aquatics. I think they're a great company. But you guys already know that. I've talked about them several times. But yeah, we'll just give these guys a few minutes and we'll set them loose. And there they are, happy in their new homes. There's 10 of them in here, actually 11. Rob sent me an extra. This guy's swimming around over here. And they are not full grown. They'll probably get at least twice this size. But they look great. And with them still growing and as much algae as there is in here, I'm kind of curious to see how long it takes these guys to chew down this algae. With 11 of them and this much algae, I mean, they're gonna be eating really, really good. But I'm just curious how long it takes for this algae to die back. If it's taken too long, I'm sure I'll you know, give the plants a little more time to get rooted in, and then I'll probably come through with the toothbrush again to try and get some more of this out. But if they start chewing it down real quick, I may not have to worry about it. But chances are, as much algae is in here, they're not gonna alleviate all this. I'm gonna have to do some more work. But I mean, look at all that algae that I left in there. I'm definitely got a lot more work ahead of me. But these guys are really cool. They got a nice blue color to them. I don't know that I've ever seen Amanos with this much of a blue hue to them. Most of the time they're just like a slightly greener shade of ghost shrimp. But these guys are really sharp, really pretty shrimp. And he's going to town. He's chowing down on that stuff. He's excited. I love it. Alright guys, so fast forward, it has been a week since the first part of this video where I first took out all that algae and added the shrimp in. And since then, about 2 or 3 days ago, I went in again with the toothbrush and got out a lot more of the hair algae and did another big water change. And honestly, I need to go in today and do it again just because that stuff, it's just growing so fast. And honestly, guys, I've been embarrassed to make this video and show this to you guys because, you know, it's embarrassing to show, you know, this tank started out so great and then it just got annihilated with algae. And that's not something you want to admit to everybody, like, look how awful my tank looks, you know. But it's just the reality of things. So I just got to keep it real and let you guys know, hey, when you set up a new tank, you're gonna fight algae, especially if you're going for a planted tank and you're running high lights like this. It's just one of those things that happens, you know. And the brown diatom algae, I don't know the science behind it, but it just seems like every time you set up a new tank, it's gonna be susceptible to brown algae. You're gonna have a bunch of brown algae show up, but it's kind of short-lived. It's a temporary deal. Once your tank gets more and more established, you know, that it kind of just goes through a phase of brown algae and then you're fine, it'll go away. And you know, this tank's going through one of those phases, and it just kind of got exacerbated by the fact that, one, I put so many plants in here to begin with. A lot of them were, you know, started with immersed growth, and so they had to go through the conversion, so there was a ton of melt back, you know, and all those leaves that are falling off and melting off and all of that, you know, that just adds so much extra nutrients into the water and all of that, and so it just, you know, causes more and more algae growth. I didn't have anything in the tank until a week ago when I added the Amanos, you know, and so there was nothing to check that algae growth. There was nothing to eat on it or anything like that, so it just went wild. Plus the fact that it all happened while I was out of town. I set this tank up, I got it running, and then basically left for a week, you know, just when it was starting to get established. You know, so what do you expect but then for algae to just go nuts? And no, it still doesn't look perfect by any stretch of the imagination. It still needs a lot of work. There's still a lot of algae to get out. But it's important to understand when you're setting up a new tank, play the long game. Don't stress yourself out over the fact that you've got some algae right now. You know, and there's some steps that you can take. I'm gonna cut back on the lighting period. You know, I'm gonna cut it back from 8 hours to probably about 6. You know, so there's not as much light throughout the day, you know, feeding that algae. You know, and the plants are coming in better. So the more I get of this Rotala, the Rotala's taken off in a big way. So the more of that is in the tank, the more that's going to take nutrients away from the algae. You know, the stargrass went through a huge conversion. You know, it had a ton of melt back, but it's finally starting to take off a little bit. You know, so the more it gets established, the more that's going to help. The S. repens is starting to take off, so that's going to help. You know, and the Hygrophila pentatophyta, you know, that stuff, it's now converted to, it had to go through a conversion process, and so it's gonna start taking off, and so that's gonna help. Plus we've now got the Amano shrimp in there, so all that's going to help to mitigate this problem to where it won't be a problem in the future. It may not look great right now, but it will get better. And that's true with, you know, any tank. So don't get discouraged just because you get some algae. You know, you hear about people that, you know, they just get frustrated. They set up a new tank, they buy all these plants, they set everything up, and it looks great, and then a couple weeks later it looks awful, and they get all frustrated with it, and they tear everything down, and they give their tank to a friend, and they say, "I'll forget it. It's just not worth it." It is worth it. Don't give up. Don't worry about it. And I might even, you know, take a couple Nerite snails from the fish room and plop them in here to help the Amano shrimp get caught up. Which, by the way, the Amanos are doing great still. A week later, you know, a couple of them have already molted. They're eating like crazy. They swim all over the tank. They're doing great. And, you know, I'm sure there's going to be somebody that shows up in the comments to say how trash this aquarium is and all that, because there's algae in there and it just looks horrible, and I can't believe he'd even show that on YouTube. I'm human, and this is a fish tank, and fish tanks grow algae. You know, it's just something that we deal with, and it's honestly not something to get upset about. Come back in 2 or 3 months. Actually, don't come back, don't leave, but give me 2 or 3 months, and then we'll show this tank again, and I guarantee you it's going to look 100 times better than it looks right now, because we're going to get this algae under control. The plants are going to have converted, and they're going to be taken off, and things are going to be looking awesome in here. And, you know, we are still going to add some fish to this tank, and it's going to be awesome. It's a work in progress, and any tank that you keep ought to be a work in progress. You know, you see YouTube videos, or you may even go to conventions and shows, and you see these super awesome looking aquascape tanks. A lot of times those tanks are set up for a day or two, and that's it, and then they break them back down. There's not a chance for algae to grow. But if you're going to keep an aquarium, you're going to deal with algae sometimes. It's not the end of the world. You can handle it. You can deal with it. All right, guys, well, spiel is over. I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching. And if you have any tips of your own for dealing with algae in an aquarium, throw those in the comments below. And don't forget, you guys are awesome. God bless you, fish nerds. I'll see you next time.
I like shrimp. I like Amano shrimp. I like cherry shrimp. I like blue dream shrimp. Crystal red shrimp. Crystal black shrimp. Babote shrimp. Shrimp gumbo. I like shrimp.